I've heard of a few people actually trying to sort of hide the fact that they're diabetic. And I mean, I think for anyone watching this video now, I just really want to encourage him to tell as much people as possible, as many people as possible, that they are diabetic, because the more people know, the better and the safer, and you sort of like start to create a more supportive environment as soon as you educate people. So I was diagnosed in September of 2012, which I guess is a bit late in life because I was diagnosed at the age of 26. I'm 35 right now.
A late bloomer.
Yeah. And funny enough, I was diagnosed in the United States. I was traveling from Cape Town, South Africa to attend a work conference on fetal alcohol syndrome in Washington, D.C. But funny enough, I started feeling, the classic symptoms 2 to 3 weeks before the time. Started experiencing some weight loss, extreme thirst and fatigue. Long story short, as soon as I landed in the States at Washington, Dulles, funny thing is they actually didn't want to let me in the country because I had lost so much weight in my face that my face never looked the same as my passport photo.
That is crazy.
And then I got in, and then I was hospitalized. Like I went to the hotel, and my sister, who also lives in the States, but she lives in California, and my parents had informed her that I wasn't looking too good upon boarding the plane. And she called an ambulance for me. Yeah, it was quite rough.
Goodness, man.
And then I was hospitalized in the States for 3 days, and then they diagnosed me on the third day.
I can't imagine what that flight must have been like for you, huh? That's crazy.
Yeah, it was terrible. I was just like using the bathroom every 30 minutes.
I hope you had an aisle seat at least. I hope you didn't have to like keep moving your fellow passengers.
I had a window seat, but luckily I had a colleague with me. So, luckily enough, she was a nurse as well that was next to me.
Do you think she could have suspected anything, or think she could have realized what was going on? Like having seen the changes in your weight loss and stuff?
Look, I think like that would be the last thing she would expect. I guess she maybe just thought I wasn't feeling well, and she thought maybe it's like something I'm coming down with. Because I don't know if she had noticed that I'd lost weight because we didn't work together every day. So she was actually like suggesting that I at least drink fluids because I couldn't eat. So I ended up drinking like all these Red Bulls.
Oh man!
And
I mean that's stuff
making matters worse.
That stuff is going to send you to the bathroom at the best of times, but when it's so full of sugar, man, that's really not going to help you.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I was there for a fetal alcohol syndrome conference, so I've always been in the public health space. I've got an undergraduate degree in the social sciences, but I've always had a focus on population health. And funny enough, I started a master's in 2012, just before I was diagnosed, that, was going to sort of tie into that population health and all of those dynamics. And then after diagnosis, I mean, seeing that we're on the topic of how diabetes actually affects your career and your work, I actually deregistered because I thought I'm just not going to be able to manage it. And I just left it. I just wanted to focus on my health, want to exercise, eat well, and gain weight again. And I just totally then left that. But then in 2019, I started studying my master's in public health. So I'll be finishing that this year because, along the way, you sort of learn that, look, diabetes becomes like something that's just trying to stop you from doing the things you love. It's trying to stop you from challenging yourself. But at the same time, I see that as an opportunity to actually tell diabetes, like, no, not today, diabetes. We're going to get something done. We're going to go on a hike. You're not going to interfere. I'm going to attend, my classes. I'm going to get my master's degree. You're not going to interfere with that. So everything becomes a challenge, that you can overcome. So once you do overcome that, it's like you can sort of tick it off the bucket list.
Man, that's fantastic. That is such a good attitude to have. And it's really, I mean, sometimes I'm guilty of falling on the more negative side of that emotional balance.
Yeah, we all are.
We all are. It's a tough gig, but you're absolutely right as far as overcoming that obstacle and that challenge. And I think, if we can get through this, we can get through many things. What I'd like to tell myself and promote on my social channels sometimes as well is how my advice to my younger self, or my advice to anybody who's newly diagnosed, would be simply that shut out as much noise as you can. Don't think about injecting and testing and pricking your finger for the rest of your life. Shut that out, and you can take that on day by day. But really what you need to focus on is the fact that diabetes will change your life, but it can be for the better in some respects, because I know now, for me, for example, I mean, I was always into sports as a kid, but then by the time I reached university, I was much more interested in beers, in beers and partying than I was sports, And so, but now I can honestly say I'm in better shape. I'm in better health now, having been diagnosed and having then used fitness and paying attention to my diet as like key pillars in my management. So it is challenging, it is tough, it is rough, and there are good days and there are really bad ones. But I think the attitude that you just described is inspiring one. So good on you.
Yeah. No, thanks so much. And I think that's actually why it's so important, for us to network, because if you have a negative day or a down day, you reach out to someone else who has it, who also is type 1 diabetic, they can definitely level with you. So it's like, you eliminate that feeling of being all alone in this.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly right. It's quite hard it's quite hard for anybody to really understand, exactly how, because it has so many profound effects on you physiologically, mentally, and physically, of course, that it's tough to really. And also what I found, this is deviating slightly from the topic, but I still think it's an important one. And actually it is part of the topic, because depending on the place that you're working within, depending on the environment that you're a part of, it can be very tough for people to relate, especially because they just don't know how badly it can affect you. In terms of the working environment, people don't understand why if I say I was late to a meeting because of my blood sugars or because I had a really bad night, they just think I'm making some excuse. Whereas so depending on the field you're working in or the environment you're working in, that could be quite debilitating for your career, for the perception, for your progress, because people just cannot quite understand why, because this invisible illness, is tough, is so tough to judge. You don't, unless you're having unless you're having a really bad hypo and you're pale as hell and you're sweating profusely, only then can you really tell how badly it's affecting somebody. Otherwise, your blood sugars are high. Outwardly you look fine. Inwardly you're grouchy, you're irritable, you're short-tempered, you're impatient, and that too can clearly affect relationships in the workplace as well. So that relatability or lack of, depending on where you are, can be a really, really crucial thing to navigate.
I've been fortunate enough to land a job at the South African Medical Research Council. So I'm surrounded by scientists. So they know exactly what diabetes is. They know exactly how it impacts, on your job. And funny enough, the first day, my very, very first day that I started, I got pulled into a 4-hour workshop, which ran from about, I'd say like 10 o'clock till about 2:30. So that was going like past what you would call lunchtime,
right.
And then, but I'd mentioned to my boss before even getting the job that I am type 1 diabetic. So constantly throughout the workshop, she was always checking, listen, is your blood sugar okay? Do you need to eat something? Do you need to check? Do you need to do that? So I've always been very open about my diabetes in the workplace. I've heard of a few people actually trying to sort of hide the fact that they're diabetic. And I mean, I think for anyone watching this video now, I just really want to encourage them to tell as much people as possible, as many people as possible, that they are diabetic, because the more people know, the better and the safer, and you sort of like start to create a more supportive environment as soon as you educate people on type 1 diabetes.
That's precisely right. I think the keyword, the two keywords there are safer, of course, because it is crucial that people know what to do. Because the amount of people that have asked me, and they've been, and you can't. I mean, before I was diagnosed, I couldn't have told you anything about diabetes. I had no idea, what this condition meant or what it entailed or anything. But the amount of people who have asked me, if you're low, do I give you insulin? No, please don't do that.
If you want to kill me.
Right, exactly. Which I can't hold against anybody, of course, because it would seem, I can see exactly why it would be the logical thing to suggest, because they see you taking your injections as what keeps you going, and they think that any issues you have revolving around your condition would involve insulin too, and because diabetes is so typically associated with sugar or avoiding sugar.
Definitely.
In a typical sense. So they're like, oh, that's the last thing I should do, right? But what you need to tell them is actually, when I'm going low, it's the only thing I need. So I think you're right. So safer being one, and then you mentioned then educating is another, which I think is very, very, very important too. We don't have to shove it down people's throats. We don't have to be the center of attention always, but important, I think, important to stimulate a conversation, important to have people know what's going on, and for people just to be more aware, I think. Because again, that invisible illness can come from a place of it. It can lead to a place of judgment, actually. I think, because people, your colleagues, maybe aren't convinced that it's really that serious until it gets bloody serious.
Yeah, especially if you're at a work conference and you actually decide to actually take a chocolate chip biscuit or something, or and then they're like, can you have that?
I've been yes, in what was interesting, I found too, I was working in Malaysia recently. I was working in an advertising agency, and in Malaysia, type 2 diabetes is a national health crisis. Really, the rate there, it's very, very prevalent because of several factors, lifestyle factors, especially diet and lack of exercise. And so the food there is traditionally very, very sweet, loaded with calories and fat and sugar and all the rest of it. And just like in any office environment, there's a whole snack table. Any empty desk gets turned into, where the snacks get piled high. So even if I tried to hide my diabetes, which I didn't, I wasn't so upfront about it, but I never tried to hide it. I just tried to keep it kind of low key. But almost immediately I was being offered these snacks day by day by day. And I was just like, guys, I can't, please, I thank you, but no, thank you. Right. Unless I make a point of getting it for myself, please don't be offended if I turn it down, because I've got to manage my sugars and stuff. And even as common as, and I know type 1 and type 2 are pretty different, but at the same time, they're still part of a conversation around the condition. People just couldn't quite grasp what it was I was going through. But the education point was important, because they would probably have tried to inject me with insulin if they come to it, which wouldn't have been good. How long have you been in at the SAMRC?
SAMRC, yeah. Right. I've been there since October 2017, so going on 4 years now.
Oh, okay.
Going on 4 years now. So yeah, it's been good. And I mean, like in terms of travel as well, I would travel more often locally within the country, within South Africa. But in 2019, I was able to take a trip to the States. So there were 3 different legs there. The first stop was Philadelphia for a conference. And, we had to interact with potential investors, because I haven't really explained my role to you, but I'm responsible for project management. So that's the management of grants and funding within the mental health space, and also the innovation of medical devices. So any medical devices related to maternal and child health, especially, like that's our focus. There are other fields as well, other diagnostics and therapeutics and those things. But for me, my focus is maternal child health. And anyway, so we had to go to Philadelphia to interact with people and all of that. And I had to constantly watch my sugars. And I mean, I was wearing, the Libre sensor as well. And that really made things easier for me. But at the same time, sometimes with these sensors, if they change rapidly, they don't always keep up with that. So there's always that bit of anxiety sitting at the back of your head, So if you're out there, you're trying to mingle, you're trying to talk to potential investors, but at the same time, it's like, I need to check my glucose, and I think I should do a prick as well. And let me not inject too much insulin so that I know, I won't get that sudden drop. But then you end up just riding high at like 10 or 11 all day,
I I get that. And you feel pretty toxic too, don't you? You can really feel it when your sugars are consistently just above where they need to be.
Exactly. And especially if you start feeling hungry, then it's like, oh, now I gotta eat, and then you might even just push it higher.
Yeah.
You know. And then we had to stop in DC, in Washington DC again, and I must say I haven't been there since my diagnosis, and it was really good to be back in that city, and everything just looked different. I was more relaxed. I was more in control of my health. You know, I felt like I could actually enjoy my trip now, you know, and then we flew all the way west.
Right. It's kind of like a poetic return, huh? You know, like back to where it all began, kind of thing. You've come full circle, but this time you've regained. You've regained your health. You're back in control of things. Like you're present. You know, you're able to be fully present.
Actually, you know, like I was saying earlier, you know, diabetes just gives everyone an opportunity to be challenged and to beat that challenge.
Right.
So going back to the States for work and doing all of that was just like, you know, not today diabetes, not for the next 3 weeks, you know, I'll just, and then I had that incident that happened in Seattle. I'd eaten, and after about 2 hours or so, I checked and I was still a bit high, and then I overcorrected. And within, I think like an hour or 45 minutes or so, I had like the straight down arrow, and it was like straight down arrow, but something like 4.5. And then, you know, you're actually lower than that. And I just left the room and I went to sit outside in the passage of the hotel room, because hotel staff, obviously, they won't just knock and come and see if you sleep in late or whatever. So I could have been like laying unconscious in that room and no one would have found me. But luckily I never passed out.
Okay. Well, what was the cure? What was the cure of choice that time? Were you nailing like Coke from the minibar, or chocolate stuff in it?
No, there was actually a vending machine in the passage.
Oh, good.
So I
good.
just
cool.
So I just ran to that vending machine, and just because I usually keep like little glucose tablets, and you know, I'll keep snack bars, but sometimes in that dire situation, you just need that. You need that Coke or that juice. You know, you need something that works really, really rapidly.
Yeah, exactly. And something like, certainly sometimes like a glucose tablet is great when you're like kind of hydrated and awake. But you know, when you're going low and you're just struggling to make sense of anything, you just need liquid. You know, you just need to be able to throw back some liquid. Rather, chewing on a dry glucose tablet when you're plummeting is not the most ideal scenario. But in fact, when you told me that story on Instagram in those messages, I was amazed at actually how our survival instinct has to kick in. You know, like this much like many other aspects of our condition, there are so many factors, so many scenarios, so many situations that we have to navigate without really thinking. Well, of course we're thinking about it, but that no one else would ever have to, you know. And it's amazing how these kinds of decisions, like sitting outside in the hallway, almost become second nature. You know, which is a crazy thing to think about. Really, it's amazing how our survival instinct has to kick in a very, very practical sense. It's not fight or flight. It's much more methodical. It's much more methodical than that, in a way. You know, you really have to think carefully about what is going on and where you need to be. Like I was out on a walk just yesterday because I was having a really stubborn high, and I pre-bolused. It was just for a protein shake, actually, which is even more annoying. It wasn't like I enjoyed a really nice big meal. It was just a protein shake. I pre-bolused for it. But I guess this stuff is extremely high in carbs, so my sugars like shot up. Yeah, my sugars shot up, and my graph just would not plot down. So I took another. I didn't rage bolus, which for those who don't know is when like you just stick a random amount of insulin in your leg just to bring something down. So that's rage bolusing. I didn't do that. I gave myself a couple more units just in case, and then it still wouldn't budge. So I thought, right, screw it, I'm off for a walk. And typically 20 minutes later, I'm feeling a bit tingly, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's just because I'm out and about. Maybe it's because it's the cold air or something. Check my sensor, and of course now I'm plummeting with the arrow going down. And I had nothing on me, and I was like, right, crap, this is kind of critical here. I wasn't so far from home, but at least a mile away, at least a mile and a half's walk, and like when you're plummeting that quickly and that low, you're like, risky. So I had to call my mum and just said, look, I'm out in the fields, I'm about a mile and a half away from home, can you please have something for me ready now, like as soon as I get back? And she said, I can come pick you up. And I was like, well, pointless, because I'm literally out in the fields, like you won't be able to come and get me. So I'll just power walk home. I couldn't run because A, I'm lazy, and B, I didn't want to do too much to bring it down even further. But at the same time, I was racing against the clock. So I kind of had to just power walk, trying to conserve energy while getting home as quick as I could.
And the more energy you burn, the faster your glucose is going to plummet as well.
Exactly. Which is why I right, precisely. So that's why I couldn't run, you see. So I had to just find this balance between, speed and time, I suppose. And I made it home in the end, and I had some Lucozade or something, and it was fine. I'm conscious of how dramatic it sounds when I say things like this, but it really is a matter of life and death. Because if you go below a certain, I've been low. I think my lowest ever low is like 1.8, which is absurd. But if you plummet below a certain level, there is an extremely real chance of you falling into the diabetic coma. Mm-hmm. And if you're not around anybody who knows what to do with you, you're not waking up by yourself, So it does sound dramatic. It might sound ridiculous to some people, but that's unfortunately the way it goes. And so what we are faced with so often, whether at work or outside the workplace, like, is these life-saving decisions we have to make, but we have to do so with such a practical lens.
So this was our work end of year function in 2015. So I'd been diabetic for 3 years, right at that point. And it's funny though, like how my knowledge of diabetes was still so limited at the time. I had been enjoying a glass of red wine, right? So we went out to a really nice steakhouse. I had some red wine or whatever. And then the food came, right? So I had ordered lamb chops and I'd ordered some chips with it, right? And what happened is I checked, I was still finger pricking at that time, right? And I checked and I was on 9.2. And then I thought to myself, okay, cool. I'm going to take 4 units because I know, I'm having alcohol as well. So I just, need to make sure that I have enough insulin. And I kept sipping and I'm wondering why this glass isn't ending. But I never knew that when I wasn't looking, the waiter was topping up my glass. Anyway, the evening goes on and I'm chatting to colleagues and I notice my speech starts to slur. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this wine must be really hitting me hard right now. I never ate all my chips, right? So I never had all that full portion of carbs that I thought I needed for that insulin that I injected. And I ate all the lamb chops, right? And my speech is slurring and I can't hear properly. I'm like, what's going on? Anyway, I thought like, okay, cool, I better get home. And I say goodnight to everyone. But then something tells me, just check your glucose again. And I check and I look at the glucometer and it says 0.6. And I'm like, wait, is this not 10.6? Like, am I not missing a line or something? And I look again and it's really 0.6. But now I start to sweat, right? And I start to really like shake. And my colleague, I just saw there was a random can of Coke on the table. I didn't know whose it was. Uh-huh. I took it, started downing it. I grabbed a cheesecake in a plate from my colleague. He started eating on the cheesecake. I took it from him. I told him I'll buy him a new one. And I just started eating the cheesecake. And that was just like my survival instinct that just totally kicked in. And luckily, I never passed out though, because I know many people were wondering how I wasn't seizing at 0.6.
Yeah,
maybe my slurred speech was because I know seizures present themselves as violently. And some people also have what's known as silent seizures, where they just like sort of just zone out into space and don't respond or don't react. And I think that kind of happened to me. Yeah.
I'm quite certain that is by far the lowest number I've ever heard displayed on a glucometer. 0.6. At that point, I'm amazed you still even had the function to to tell your brain to move your hand to grab the Coke. I'm amazed you even recognized what a can of Coke was.
I never thought of it. I never thought of it. That just happened. It was just pure survival. And, so many people are like, how are you still walking or upright? But you see, the mix of alcohol sort of made me unaware of my hypo symptoms.
Yeah. And
I thought I was getting tipsy, but that was the hypo all the time.
Alcohol. So another lesson to take away from this one is alcohol really does mask hypo symptoms at the best of times. In terms of dizziness, slurred speech, temperature. Sometimes, some people get flushed. Some people get flushed with alcohol, which can actually be a measure of low blood sugar as well. So alcohol and diabetes don't always mix that well. And also, alcohol can I
quit all alcohol after that night. That's another thing with diabetes, though. Like, when you're in a conference room, you're with people, they're speaking to you in meetings, and you start to feel low. You just need to sort of remind yourself that you don't have to be polite in that instance. Because your survival, your health, your well-being comes first in that. So if people are sometimes speaking to me, I just stop them at work. I'm like, listen, excuse me, I need to do something real quick. And then I tell them I'm type 1 diabetic. I'm not feeling too great at this moment. And then they're like, no, by all means, go ahead or whatever. And then, if I have to correct a low or a high or whatever, and then we just continue to engage. So diabetes is just one of those things that's just disruptive.
Yeah, man. So I think disruptive is a really good way of putting it. And we have to acknowledge, and I said this in the last conversation I was having with Abdullah, I think, because he was in an environment where it was very high pressure, and he was kind of very afraid to be too forthcoming about his condition in case it meant, negative connotations for his progress, that he thought it might hold him back. But, on the one hand, as you just said, there is nothing more important than your health, than your personal well-being, So if you have to, he was in a situation where he couldn't excuse himself from meetings in case, his boss fired him. But if you're in that kind of environment, you simply have to get yourself out. And I know it sometimes is easier said than done, especially in today's job market. It's not always easy just to, mix and match, your career as you'd like, but you have to prioritize your health. So it can be disruptive. And I think what I said to him was, like, as soon as we acknowledge that it can be, as soon as we acknowledge that it is a weakness, let's face it, it doesn't stop us doing anything we want to do. Diabetes is disruptive. It's not a complete deal breaker, though. At the same time, we have to acknowledge, I think, that it can be debilitating for sure. And once we admit that, I think admitting weakness is not weak. It doesn't, in fact, admitting weakness makes you stronger, because it puts you in a position to build strategies, to build coping mechanisms, to build a routine of self-care and, or self-preservation, or whatever it is you want to call it, around making sure that your condition isn't as disruptive. But burying your head in the sand and trying to ignore it and acting like it doesn't exist and pretending it's not happening to you, in the long run, that's only going to be so much worse for you. So acknowledging it, embracing it, seeing it for what it is, which, some days it sucks. Like, we've all been there.
Yeah.
But as long as you are, honest and open with yourself and with others about it, that's when you find things start to get a lot easier for you. And people who you might assume could never understand or would never tolerate your condition, you'd be amazed how supportive and open and curious actually a lot of people can be. But it's about taking that first step to get there, which for a lot of diabetics, people I've spoken to, there is still a huge stigma. There is still a huge sense of shame and almost embarrassment about the condition for many reasons. Maybe it's because type 2 diabetes, which is like the poster child, gets so much more negative attention because of the association with poor lifestyle choices and so on. So the amount of times people say to me, oh, you don't look diabetic or whatever. And there are some very blanket statements and very, vague claims that are made about, the condition, about the associations with diabetes. But the reality is a lot more complex than that. So going back to what you were saying earlier about educating, I think we all have a duty and a care to ourselves and to other diabetics and to others around us who might need to help us if the time comes for it. Yeah. To be upfront and to educate them. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely. I also feel, funny enough, my first job that I had, when I was diagnosed, I was working with a lot of nurses as well, because I was involved in a study on pregnancy and alcohol and other substance abuse. The amount of ignorant statements that I actually received from nurses, qualified nurses, registered nurses who are actually educated, right?
Wow.
It's just like feeding with a lot of negativity, like, now that I'm diabetic, I better start having children because someday in future I might not be able to. People telling me, I mean, one nurse even told me, oh, diabetes, it's a slow death. I'm like, what? And all that. And I just needed to, well, I eventually got another job, but being out of that environment, but also sort of facing similar sort of ignorant statements, and be it in the public space or at work, then I'm like, nah, I'm not going to get mad anymore at this, because, you know, people who make statements like that don't fully understand. So then I make it my duty to actually educate them. So, for example, someone tells me, oh, you can't eat the chips or whey biscuit. Then it's like, hey, do you know how insulin works? You know, can I just... Can I just take 30 seconds? Can I just take 30 seconds and, you know, just explain to you, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't get that mad anymore.
That's it, which takes time, I'm sure. You know, it's a brilliant attitude, a brilliant approach to have, but it does take time to get to that stage. You know, I'm you know, I've not long been there myself, and I'm at the stage now where I'm, you know, the other day I was at the gym, and someone noticed the Libre on my arm, and they were asking me about it. The sensor, they were asking me about it, and I took 5 minutes out of my workout to just go and stand with him and just chat about you know, what it was. And he was just kind of genuinely curious. I think he said he was going to get one. I'm not sure even if he was diabetic, but you know, sometimes having the presence of mind to do so is not always that easy, because you know, it's something that we have to live with literally 24 hours a day. And so even taking 5 minutes of that day sometimes to explain it to someone can be exhausting, because we let's face it, in an ideal world, we would want that world to understand everything we're going through all the time. You know, we wouldn't have to explain it. So it can be tough, and it can be frustrating. And because, again, going back to that sense of stigma and shame, it's like, we don't want to always admit we have it. We don't want to talk about our broken pancreas. We don't want to talk about having to inject ourselves every day, because it makes it more real. You know, sometimes we do it just, you know, we do these things on autopilot, but then having to explain to someone that you inject, hearing yourself out loud saying, I inject 4, 5, 6 times a day. Shit.
Yeah.
You know, everyone
exactly.
You know, everyone at the minute is talking about, oh, you know, getting 2 vaccine jabs, and we're like, oh, smooth sailing.
I know what you mean, man. I know it's just second nature, you know, because like we're so tuned in. When you wake up, you inject, and you know, you eat whatever. But when you actually take a moment and you're explaining and you're breaking it down to someone, it's almost like the person just stares at you in complete disbelief. Like, how can you live like this for the rest of your life? It's like, when you don't have a choice, you just do it.
Right, man, exactly that. It's exactly that. And people look at you injecting, oh, I could never do that. It's like, trust me, if you didn't have a choice, you can do it. Be. Right. I mean, I had to do it.
Exactly.
I had a rabid fear of needles. Still do, actually. Even going to get my vaccine and my flu jab, I'm like shuddering. You know, I really don't like it. Managing with the small needles that we use is okay by now, I guess. But yeah, I still have a huge fear of needles. And so you're right. So people look at you like, what, you have to do this every day? You have to, every meal? Like, yeah.
Sometimes you've even got to take it when you're starving, and you know, you can't even eat anything, but just to bring your glucose down to a level where you can actually eat. Yeah. You know, without shooting through the roof.
And so, having someone say it back to you and kind of repeat and say out loud what you already know about yourself and your condition, it can be frustrating. But at the same time, you know, seeing it as an opportunity to educate, to create conversation, is a really important one, because I think ultimately in the long run, it benefits not just you, it benefits, you know, society, without sounding dramatic, society as a whole. I think the more people can understand and discuss and talk about this and ultimately support and help each other freely, the better. Because, and again, like you pointed out earlier, like, even having the type 1 diabetic community to talk amongst ourselves, I don't know. I know, sorry, that's a lie. I've only actually ever met one other type 1 diabetic in Malaysia. I know Abdullah, the guy that I spoke to last time, but we've never met face to face. You're probably the 4th or 5th person I've spoken to over a Zoom call like this. I've met some brilliant people on Instagram, for example. Yeah, it's nice. I've met some other brilliant people on Instagram, but otherwise, like, we seem to be few and far between, so as much as we can do to bridge that gap between us all and educate, our colleagues, our peers, our families, all the better, because hopefully soon that will start to overlap.
Funny you should say that, because the first time I met another type 1 diabetic was at work. So this was at my previous job. Yeah, at my previous job, I was working at this sort of health tech company. And I'm in the kitchen, and there's an intern who was visiting from Boston, in the States.
Boston.
So Boston, exactly. And
Boston.
And then I see this, what looks like an insulin pump, on the side of him. And I'm like, dude, is that an insulin pump? He's like, yes, I'm type 1 diabetic. I'm like, me too. And we stayed friends since. That was 2015. That was just before I had that bad incident with the wine.
Right.
So it was about 2 months. It was about 2 months before that. And funny enough, when my wife and I got married in 2017, he actually flew in all the way from Boston to Cape Town.
No way.
For our wedding. Exactly. He stayed with me for a week. And then after the wedding, he still stayed for another week, but he just did like some sightseeing on his own.
Sure. Oh, that's beautiful.
I mean, look, workplace diabetes, for me, it just all melts so nicely into one. I've heard of someone, I don't know the person personally, but they actually, when they found out they were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, they actually like quit their job, and they just thought like, oh no, they're ill now, they can't work, or whatever the case may be, which is like, I guess like for the ones that we see, I guess it's like we're preaching to the converted, because all of us are so positive about diabetes, we enjoy the challenge, and we all network among ourselves. But there are those who are hiding in those deep dark corners, who might not have an Instagram account, who might not even have a Facebook account, or whatever the case may be. So I think like if we do come across people like that who feel completely discouraged to work, or to do anything because like the diabetes they feel is crippling, then I feel like each of us have a responsibility where we actually need to take that person under our wing and actually tell them like, look, what do you need? What do you need to do? What do you want to know? What do you understand? And also not just engage with them, but engage with the immediate family as well, who they live with, their wives, their husbands, their children or their parents, to actually explain to them,
That's
to actually explain to them how it works. And I mean, look, each of us, like I said, it's not about waiting. It's like, oh, I know this guy who he's not doing too well with diabetes. Can someone help him? But I mean, if you're the diabetic, why don't you help him? If you know of the guy.
That's actually a fantastic observation, actually, one which I haven't really thought about that much, because I wasn't aware of, before I started, my Instagram channel, Kinetic Diabetic, I wasn't really aware of the scope, of the scale of the T1D community, as it were. And I'm so glad I found it. I think it's a brilliant thing to be a part of. But as you've so rightly pointed out, there are so many people, I'd say far many more people, like without these channels, without this network, who are in a very difficult place, who are suffering with that stigma, with that burden of self-care, like the whole concept of having to do this for the rest of your life really is an unpleasant prospect, and certainly so for a lot of people. It can be crippling. And so you're right, I think we do have a responsibility, not just to put things on social media, and which is a great way to get the word out, don't get me wrong, that's why we're doing this, but at the same time, we have a responsibility not just to put things out on social and write nice long captions about it, but actually go out and engage personally with people, whether or not, because like you never, and this goes for any and all walks of life, I suppose, but you never know what someone else is going through. You never know you never know who someone else might know. So whatever you can do for one person who's uncle, who's cousin, if it's not immediate family, maybe it's distant, maybe it's a neighbor, but by being present, by being forthcoming, by being proactive, I guess, even in the face of difficulty and obstacles, by doing these things and trying to set an example, not necessarily always the best example, because that holds us to an impossible standard, because there are tough days, but just by being an example of what life can look like, with type 1 diabetes, and while acknowledging that it's far from perfect, but here I am, here is me, and here's what we can do. And there are superstar athletes, there are famous, there are Hollywood actors, there are many people at the top of their game with this condition. And it can be tough to ever see yourself on the same level as them, but hell, if they can, so can you.
Exactly. And the question that you posted as well about, do you ever feel like type 1 diabetes sort of hinders your work ethic or your ability to actually excel in your career? I think that's something that also hit home, because sometimes when you're sitting at work and you're focusing and you're zoning in, and then diabetes comes along and just disrupts the whole process, and then it's almost like sometimes you struggle to get back to that same level of focus. But funny enough, the pandemic, as bad as it has been, like, I could actually find the positive side of that, from being able to work at home, having access to everything by me. I have my fridge in the next room. You know what I mean? I don't have to feel that sort of pressure of interrupting meetings to check blood sugar or to eat something. So now I'm on a Zoom meeting and I can actually be on mute and I can be chewing, until they ask me a question and then they catch me with my mouth full, but that's okay,
Yeah, no, of course, I know exactly what you mean. It is. I personally have had, and this is potentially a very selfish and self-centered observation to make, but I personally have had a much better time of it during the pandemic than I have, previously, because of that precise reason. I quite like working from home. I enjoy my own company. I'm okay with that. And as you said, I had all of the tools that I needed to take better care of myself. And actually, certainly at the beginning, my blood sugars were more consistent than they'd ever been, because my meal times were regular. I had food there if I needed it. I was even exercising regularly on a small balcony space. So having that complete routine in this little bubble of mine, that actually was really good for my health. So exactly. So and
good for your mental health too. And good for your mental. I mean, the pandemic on its own sort of challenged everyone's mental health, because suddenly now people find themselves in this trapped situation, not knowing how long it's going to last or when it's safe to go out. That initial level 5 lockdown, or I don't know how the levels worked in Malaysia or in the UK, but level 5 is the highest level. Everything locked down.
Yeah, we had similar tiers actually, and I think it was. I mean, I was lucky because I had company at home as well. So I was, as much as I was enjoying my own company because I was working in my little home office, I still had someone to cook with and hang out with and so on. But I think what the pandemic did in many ways though is challenged us mentally in ways that we weren't expecting, because it's tough to register because it's not tangible, but just how draining it is, like waking up every day and turning your phone on to read the news and it's just all shit. It's all
just sometimes death. You just want to leave it off. You're so sick of COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And all you can see, whether it's Instagram, whether it's BBC News, whatever it is, it's just coming from all angles. And even if it's like some celebrities putting out some videos to stay positive and stuff, it's still they're doing it because of this. That's just annoying in itself. But even they're even doing it because of the negative situation. So everything is just oppressive.
Exactly. Oh, it is. Look, I mean, I can't wait when I'm done with this masters. Just decided I'm gonna rejoin a cricket club again. Because since I've been diagnosed, like I haven't played like sports like at a club level, but you know, now that I'm going to be free from my studies and I'm challenging myself more to sort of balance diabetes and sports, I just want to join a cricket team again and just play, you know. I don't want to let diabetes just stop me from doing the things I love.
I mean, yeah, man, a cricket club would be awesome. I mean, it's winter is coming up in the UK, so I think cricket season's over here, so I'll have to find something else to do. But I've just joined a gym, so that's a good start. Anyway, look, we are coming to the end of our time here now. And so firstly, I want to say thank you for joining me. It's been a really, really excellent session talking to you. And thank you very much for sharing your insight and your valuable input. I just want to end on a similar note with another pearl of wisdom from you, if you like, Earl. And my question to you is, what advice would you give to any newly diagnosed type 1 diabetic who might be watching this? What would you say to them?
For me, when I was diagnosed, I never had any other network, and I was sort of just winging it and making a lot of mistakes, especially with my insulin doses. And I ended up going low a lot and found myself in quite a few dangerous situations. So my advice to newly diagnosed diabetics is, you know, get on social media, network with other type 1 diabetics. You're welcome to follow me as well. And, you know, you can shoot me a DM or just post a comment or just ask me anything. You know, but I'd say it's just so important to network with other diabetics and to share similar experiences, to share advice, whether it's diet advice, exercise advice, and just all around mental health support, because it's quite a shock to your system once you're diagnosed the first time around. And, you know, just the sooner you can network with other type 1 diabetics, the better, you know, and the better for your control and the better for your management and your all-around well-being. Yeah.
Right, excellent advice. And for those of you who do want to follow Earl, and I suggest you do, handle below, it is at Earl952. And of course, follow me if you're not already doing so at kinetic.diabetic. So for now, Earl, I will say thank you and goodbye, but I'm looking forward to having you back for another topic of discussion, which I think many of our male viewers in particular might find interesting. So stay tuned for that, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But for now, Earl, I will say thank you again. It's been a pleasure having you on and talking to you and getting a sense of your experiences and the journey you've been on, which is a very interesting one. And I, for one, am just extremely glad you've been able to come full circle, go back to Washington where it all began, with a new lease on life and a new sense of energy and positive thinking. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Jacob. Thanks so much for having me. I'm always happy, you know, to join your calls. I'm always keen for a conversation. Thanks so much.